Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with Doineann director Damian McCann and writer Aislinn Clarke. Thank you guys so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having us.
So first up, I'll formally say this. I have said this before, but it's a wonderful, tense thriller. It's really well performed, great sense of location and space. Fantastic job all around. Really a joy to watch. I just want to talk a little bit about your collaboration. So you guys teamed up. Aislinn, you wrote this together. You wrote this, but you guys developed the concept together. Is that?
We were introduced by a mutual friend. Damian had already done a whole bunch of really great documentaries, and he was looking at moving into a narrative fiction feature film. And our friend put us in touch with each other. It's actually the first time I've written for someone else. I'm a director myself, and it's the first time I wrote for someone else. But so our first meeting, we went for a coffee, and we didn't have anything except, you know, the possibility of doing something. So we just discussed what kind of films we like, what we had in common in that respect, and we're both into that kind of thriller genre, and we grew it from there, basically.
And yourself, Damian, how did that relationship sort of grow from there?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty straightforward enough, actually, thinking back on it now. We, as Aislinn said, we had our first couple of meetings, and then pretty quickly, as I remember it now, maybe I'm misremembering, but Aislinn came back pretty quickly with the outline of a potential idea, and the basic kind of acorn of an idea, which is about a guy who has a holiday home on a remote island with his wife and child, and when he goes back to the mainland for a bit of work, when he returns, the wife and child are missing. Which I thought was, it's as all good ideas are. They're quite simple, and so we sort of developed it from there. We shared stories. We both had an interest in island culture and island life and island stories, and we shared some stories that we'd heard over the years, and sort of took it from there. But my memory of it was very, very painless. Maybe I'm wrong, Aislinn. Was it painful for you?
No, I think you're right. I think it was actually. Yeah, I mean, it's, as I say, it's my first experience of writing for someone else. So I don't really have anything to compare it to, but I've done a lot of development, and I think the development was actually pretty painless.
That was the one thing. Well, once the development was done, and once the script had been written, that's where I started to panic. Then thinking a wee bit, once a director has written you a script to be the director on it, then you start second guessing yourself as to what that person was thinking of. And Aislinn had made The Devil's Door, which I was a huge fan of. And so yeah, it's then about trying to take your own ownership over it and try not to second guess it too much. But we'd some early instances where I was able to share location photos, or I was able to send some cast and decisions to Aislinn, and we both seemed to be on the same page about it. So from there on out, I felt a bit more comfortable that, whatever groundwork we'd done together in the development, that it was kind of going in the right direction in terms of a unified vision for what the film should be.
Yeah. And actually, that's an interesting thing. So you had been directing most of your own work. Was there an element of relief of just getting to go, well, I've developed as much as I want, I can hand it over? Was there a little bit of nervousness? I know obviously you're in good hands and what happened there, but I know it can be like, other people might not make the creative choices that you always make.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am quite sort of easygoing in that respect. It's not that I would have an issue with writing for anyone else necessarily, but sorry, my dog was shaking, and that probably cut that out.
Important extra surprise guest.
Make themselves known somewhere. Anyway, I hadn't written for anybody else before, but I liked Damian as soon as I met him. We knew people in common. I knew he was going to do a good job. I'd seen some of his work, and in some ways, actually, it's sort of it's quite nice to write something and then go, well, that's my job done, so like you just hand it off, and I knew that it was in good hands, and I knew that they would do a good job, and it was they did a phenomenal job, and it was actually quite nice to just go, well, there it is. And it wasn't an easy shoot for the guys, but COVID and all that, it was shot during the pandemic, and I was just kind of sitting at home going, oh, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. But then, like, you know, I didn't have all of the stress to deal with that the guys did. And in some ways, that's quite nice, actually. You create it, you send it off, you know it's going to be done well, and then that's it, you know. So I have other projects of my own on the go anyway, but it was quite nice to and then to see the final result, you know, that's really, because when you're making it yourself, you're so in it the whole way, and there's never really a big surprise, you know, because every element of it has been you've been so on top of. But to have this big surprise at the end on unveiling was just really remarkable.
You talked about the development scheme that you guys put in for, and it being very painless. So I presume you guys submitted this project specifically for that scheme.
Well, I can't remember the timeline of it now. I mean, I had wanted to do something, and particularly I'd wanted to do something in the Irish language. That's, you know, it's a big passion of mine, and one of the draws towards Aislinn was that she'd gone through primary and secondary school in Irish, and she would have that understanding of the language and the culture and the stories. I think we maybe had started discussions about working together, and then pretty soon afterwards, as it happened, this scheme came up in the north part of Northern Ireland. There's an Irish language broadcast fund which does a lot of great work, and they work with TG4 and BBC. And this opportunity came up through a scheme called Galway here, which is a low budget feature film initiative, effectively. So I think Aislinn and I had already started by that, you know, chatting by that point. But then once the scheme came up, we were pretty certain what they were after, and, you know, what was involved in terms of budget. And of course, the budget usually dictates how you write the script and how you kind of come up with the idea, in terms of you can't have loads of locations and special effects and things like that. So I think once the scheme then came up, we started factoring that into the idea. So that's my memory of it anyway.
Well, yeah. You didn't go the lowest, because there was some great sea scenes in there, and boats and water and storms.
Well, when I first read the script, and it was called, I think at the time Aislinn was using a working title called Bad Weather, and I remember thinking, look, this isn't going to go well, you know. I mean, eventually it's going to have to rain at some point, and knowing my luck, will be filming in June, and, you know, the sun will be splitting the rocks. But I think it was, again, Aislinn had made The Devil's Doorway, so had an understanding for what a low budget feature, the restrictions involved, the budget involved, and what you can and can't do. So whilst there are moments, you know, Aislinn certainly picked the moments in the script where you could go a wee bit bigger without going over the top. And then it was just a matter of, when we were in production, figuring out how we would actually go about that. I mean, there's a final scene. I don't think it's a spoiler to say the storm's coming. The film's called Doineann, which means storm in English. And so a storm's got to come at some point. It's that Chekhov thing, isn't it? You know? So it was trying to figure out how to do that as simply as possible, and as cheaply as possible, I guess. But I think we succeeded all right with it.
It looks great. Yeah, so what was that budget in the end for it?
I'm always afraid of getting in trouble for talking about budget.
Or like rough.
Well, we had 18 days shoot. It would be similar in the south. I know there's the POV scheme. It would be a similar budget around that. And then in the north we have we have new talent focus. So it's 18 days shoot. It's a low budget, but, you know, again, it's about being smart with the story decisions when Aislinn's sitting down to write it. And then for my own purposes, it's about, you just have to prepare everything within an inch of its life. And, you know, there are 397 setups in the film, and every single one of them were shortlisted. And it's, you know, not always nice to work that way, because you want the flexibility of changing on the day. But on an 18-day shoot in the middle of a pandemic, you just can't do it. So I just made sure that it was prepped, you know, within an inch of its life, and I knew every shot and, you know, what I wanted to do within the location. So I think it works out okay with all that stuff factored in pre-production.
And just wondering if you could chat to me a little bit about the characters as well. Ashley, would you have been involved with the casting? Would that have been something totally hands off? Would you have had people in mind?
No, I didn't. And actually, it's kind of just the way I work. When I'm writing, I don't think of people. It's not fully conscious. I just don't. And I know some other people do. And always, whenever I submit a script, people go, "Oh, who are you? Who do you have in mind?" As if, you have someone. I find it kind of limiting to do that for some reason in just the way my mind works. But so I didn't have anybody in mind. They were completely made up people in my head. But when Damian came back and said that he thought that Bríd Brennan was maybe considering it, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that's just phenomenal, really good casting. She would be absolutely. I didn't know that she had any Irish, and it turns out that she had school Irish, but you'd never know it from the film with how it was managed. But she was phenomenally cast, perfect, better than I could have imagined. And I was really pleased with the casting choices.
She was fabulous. And I think that wizened character, that kind of knowledgeable, salt of the earth, knows the area, and empathetic. It was kind of like it was a breath of fresh air to watch. Like you're kind of watching you look at the log line and you think it would be quite a male heavy film, but it isn't, like if you look at the kind of the driving forces of that is the wife and again the investigator. So it's a pleasure to watch as well, because it takes you a little bit in the unexpected.
Slán na bóchalín beag dahúr. Cúpla uair sin na mate.
Okay.
It's just been quite intense lately. She hasn't been herself. Sometimes I worry that she might.
She might.
Hello? Tá bhain céile Éirigh agus óach. Posin! Tá imní gnearna sí rud ag an seafóideach.
She héan nó den nana. Níl McDarrell an seo? Níl mór an ama agad dá an bhfuil?
Sí seo.
Cleatán.
Ja, sagam. Ja, me.
Yeah, if you could just tell me a little bit about where the characters came from, then, if you're...
I think because we were talking about, and I love this kind of thriller, I love thriller genre films, and obviously that's kind of my thing, but they are very often very male oriented. The perspective and the point of view are very male. Everything's very masculine. It's all very heavy in that direction, and whereas actually women are a huge portion of the market for these films. Women love thrillers. That was something that was, has been recently recognized. So I think when I was faced with writing a thriller of my own, rather than a horror film, I was thinking it'd be really nice to have an unexpected female perspective, because I think very often some of those films too, when they have women in them, they're not women that I recognize from real life. I'm like, who are these people? The tropes, the female tropes that we see. So I
almost like they're women but viewed through the gaze of a man.
Yeah, like they're imaginary. Just like, I've never met a woman like this, So whereas Irish women uphold so much of society quietly in the background, especially mothers, grandmothers do so much and are unseen and unappreciated. And that's kind of where the idea for the character of Leisha was born. An older woman who's been through everything and she's very wise. She knows exactly what the crack is. But because she's a woman, she's underestimated by the male characters who think she's no one to worry about, who think she's going to be silly and a bit daughtery, whatever, but actually that's their Achilles heel and that's her strength, because she is very on the ball. And that's kind of where she was born. And then again with Siobhan, in the first part of the film, you might think I've seen this character before, and that's sort of intentional. where it seems like she's this, slightly weak, malleable person, but she totally upends your expectation at a certain point in the film, and then you're like, I just always want to see that. I always want to see women behaving in films the way women in my life, women that I know, myself. I just want to see that. And if I was in this situation, what would I do? And that's what I wanted to put on the screen.
And even in the dynamics, in the way that they engage with the world, and even the way that they, in their own way, confront the world, it's very, it feels very truthful. Like, it's not a direct argument. It's a quiet processing. I really enjoyed that. It reminded me in Happy Valley a little bit, where I was like, God, I'd seen that setup before, where it's, police officer investigating a crime, but, here's somebody that I know who's, kind of like the mum, the local woman who knows the area, seeing it through the Irish language as well, and that the kind of texture that gives it, because it gives it its own kind of strong sense of character. Like, this is a strong sense of place, and you captured the place and the local kind of characters. So you have like it's not a spoiler, it's like one of the kind of side characters talking about 5G and kind of really getting into it, but it makes like, it's a nice break as well from that like quiet intensity, and you're expecting like pause, beat, shock, reveal, surprise, and then you're like, actually you've moments of kind of observation and humor. Where did those bits come from? Or
well, I'm from the country myself. I'm from the Republic of Ireland originally, but I've been in South Armagh or my family moved to South Armagh when I was a teenager, and this is recognizable to me. You would see posters put up on lampposts. Don't know who's doing it, no idea who's behind it, but now and then you would just see this. Someone is having a panic about something that feels quite conspiracy-ish. And I have seen no 5G, 5G causes cancer. It's been other things across the years that people were quietly having a little panic about. So I don't know what it is about rural communities where you can kind of get this little phenomenon, and it's catching. And then people kind of get together into a little clump and they're all worrying about this specific thing. I think that's something that I've seen coming from rural community.
But it's enjoyable as well. And it's not even sort of tarring that particular character with this negative brush, because, when the lead kind of goes in and demands help, he's the first person that was like, as well, like, I'll help you. It's not a
because
character.
I think that kind of thinking it's coming from a place of feeling a responsibility for your community, feeling a connection with your community, and the sense of us being a group that protect each other, that help each other. I think that's where it comes from. So, yeah.
Excellent. So you talked about it kind of developing it for the scheme, and again, the limitations of that as well, of working with a smaller budget. Could you, were there any darlings that had to go?
I don't know. Damian, do you?
Well, I do remember when we sat down, there was some stuff there were some scenes in cars and on boats, and I remember the scenes didn't go, but I think they were just tweaked, because obviously once you're in the low loader and things like that, you could be out for a day and get 3 minutes worth of material. So I think there were conversations within cars and conversations on boats that I think were just put on land. But again, you don't notice it anymore. It's like, once you kind of figure out just the right way around it, or the clever way around it, you don't miss it. And there's enough in the cars going between places that it all works out okay. But I think that was the only restriction that I remember.
The only thing, and it's a really small thing, the only thing that I miss is I had Tomas as a Coors fan. Do you remember?
You had a what?
Tomas was a Coors fan, and my script,
oh yes,
like he was listening to the best of the Coors.
That's right.
Really seriously.
Right. There would have been licensing issues there. That's right. I remember that as well.
Yeah,
when he turns on the radio, the Coors on. Yes, yeah. And every time he gets back into the car, came back on, which was very good.
And just tell me a little bit then about the edit. So if you had this planned if you had this plan, Damien, so meticulously, did that make the edit easier? Was it a long edit again? And talk to me while you're chatting about the sound mix as well, because
it was a bit of both, I guess. It was, there's still so much to do in the edit, and I was lucky. I worked with an editor called Sorcha in the Gilawara, and I often think, you're talking about those characters of Leisha and Siobhan. I often think, particularly with Siobhan, actually, Aislinn wrote the character. Clare Monnelly kind of became the character, and then Sorcha at a certain point then kind of took up the baton, and she was very good at looking at performances and small moments, noticing what Clare was doing and things like that. But certainly, once you've got only a certain amount of shots, you're kind of limited as to where you can go. But I always enjoy the edit. I mean, it's a strange process during a pandemic because I never once sat with Sorcha in a room together. It was always on the computer. And then the sound mix, the sound mix to me was the most exciting part because it almost creates a separate world altogether again. And particularly with the locations we're talking about, these kind of wild, rugged, remote places, once the wind's all built in and the rain's built in and all that sort of exterior sound, it all just builds another world or another dimension on top of the whole thing. And then there are smaller things like I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but there are certain scenes where sound effects are used then, and it completely changes the scene. It makes it all so much more dramatic because when you hear it, you can feel it a lot more. And that was certainly then when we sat down to watch the sound mix, it was one of those moments where you're like, God, we actually made a film here, and then the music, of course, plays on top of that again. That was a lot of fun, trying out different things with the musicians, composers called Score Draw Music. They would kind of send stuff back and forward while we were in the edit, and we would try stuff out while we were still editing and things like that. So the post-production was very enjoyable because I was sitting at home in my pajamas, and all the hard stuff was done. So yeah, it was great. It was the post-production was a joy.
I'd say when you're filming on the sea, with an infant child and with storms, yeah, I can imagine post is a bit more relaxed.
Well, I always, I often hear directors and they say, what did you think of the shoot? And I say, I had a really good time. I really enjoyed it. And all I can think is, am I doing it wrong? Because, it's so stressful. I found it also.
Well, it was a pandemic on,
It was a pandemic on, yeah. And there is that thing then, and again, I hate to talk about the pandemic, but, there is that thing then where everything's slower because you're only allowed a certain amount of people in the room, and for checks and stuff, like checks don't really happen and things like that. And then, as you said, there's a baby involved who, by the way, was incredible. Like the other actors and all were pinching him to try and make him cry because they were jealous because he was outshining them in the scenes, He was so good. Like there were moments where you would like, we need the baby to cry in this scene, and he would turn up and he would cry. Or you'd need him to be really happy and he would just be happy, or there was a moment, there's a scene when Peter Coonan's character Tomas walks into the room, who's the baby's father, and he walked into the room and the baby went, Dada. I was like, are you joking? Like, he's taking the mic, But and it's funny casting a baby, they kind of show you a load of pictures of babies, but I went for the one called Oscar. I just thought that would be, positive thinking and all that sort of stuff. So we had Oscar.
Yeah,
it was great.
That's it. Irish language nomination, foreign language nomination. There you go. It's a little bit of luck. Did you before we leave the edit, actually, is it important to work with an editor and people that know Irish or that can speak good Irish? Does it make a big, because I'm sure they're like hen's teeth as well.
I think so. It's everything. It comes down to intonation and the way someone says something. Not only is the wording correct and is the grammar correct, but there's so much more to the way things are said. Or so I find it very useful. And I've worked with Sarah for the guts of 8 years. She edits all the documentaries I do. So again, it's about working with people who you've got that sort of second hand with, and you don't need to kind of tiptoe around. She doesn't need to tiptoe around me. But in terms of the Irish, I don't know. I would be interested to try it sometime to see what it would be like. But think it would be quite difficult. Now, as Aislinn mentioned, Bríd is Irish. Bríd Brennan is Irish, was school Irish. So, I was always quite amazed at the things she was doing. We had a language coach, Orlando Kearney, that went over the stuff with Bríd, but her Irish was flawless as far as I was concerned. And I was telling someone else the story of, after a take, I remember I went up to give a note to Bríd, and with some of the other actors, with their Irish speakers, I just go up and talk Irish to them. And of course, once Bríd is talking Irish, I instinctively forget that she's not an Irish speaker. And so I was going up to her and talking Irish to her, She was kind of looking at me like I had two heads, but it was obviously, whatever she was doing was convincing enough that, that it just sounded pitch perfect to me.
Brilliant. And so now it's getting out there, it's going to be seen in the world. What has the response been so far?
It's been good. It's coming out on the 28th, and we've had a few instances now. It premiered at Galway, that was online, and it premiered internationally at Newport Beach. And we had the Belfast Film Festival showed it here in the Odeon in Belfast, and there was like 400 people at that, and that was, it was a lovely experience for the first time to be watching the film with an audience. It's one of those things that's where you always anticipate that it will eventually go, but of course when you're filming it and the pandemic happens, you're never quite sure will it ever make it there. So it's just been a nice experience. And after Belfast, actually, me and Peter Coonan went up to Derry a few nights later, and it was, as Aislinn had mentioned there, it was 80%. It was an 80% female audience, and they all came to see that character of Leisha, played by Bríd Brennan. And then there was great engagement afterwards in terms of, representation of an older female character in a intelligent genre movie afterwards. So it's all good to hear what people think of it and how they're taken to the story. Yeah,
and Aisling?
I think it's been really positive. It's been great. It's, as I say, it was brand new to me too, because I'd written it. It feels like forever ago now. And then I hand it off to Damian. I go off, do my own thing. And then eventually the film's finished. And I saw it, I was sent it, obviously before it was actually in the festival. And I was kind of nervous about watching it just because, I don't know, you always feel a wee bit like, oh God. I knew that they would have done a good job. It's just that weird feeling that you get. But I just thought it was they'd done such a good job. Damian's directing, so nice, so good. Bríd's performance, everybody's performance, everything was perfect. But then when we went to the Belfast Film Festival and saw it on the big screen, and we had the 5.1 sound and everything, and it was on another level. It just sounded amazing, and the sound mix is so good. I think in this, the score is so good as well. Love the sound mix. I'm a bit nerdy about sound stuff, and I thought it was so good. I couldn't really appreciate that in my speakers at home.
It was fabulous. It was so elevating and unobtrusive, and it's hard to get that, I think. It really just added to the mood. My thing is, especially when it comes to sound, the less I sort of notice, but I found myself kind of tensed when I was watching it, and then you're kind of monitoring what you're as yourself as you're watching it in a weird way, or I would, because I'm like, what am I feeling when I'm engaged in this film? But I was like, it was actually just really well, like balanced.
It really was.
The guy who does the sound mix, Paul Mains, he's kind of a wizard. He does a lot of stuff in the north here, but sometimes what I noticed as well are the moments when he cuts the sound all together, and it's really unsettling. When you've been so used to hearing soundtrack under the bottom of it, or you're used to hearing Atmos under the bottom, the moment that he cuts all sound, the decision not to use any sound at all is like a different experience. So it was just it's almost sometimes the thing that you don't think about until the end, and then it just completely revolutionizes.
I think sound is the funny one. I think it's, especially in genre and thriller films, it is one of the top 3 most important things in the whole film. It's extremely important. And people overlook that. And even the audience, nobody is ever going to say it to you. The casual, average audience member is never going to say anything about the sound. But I'll tell you what, if it's not good, they'll notice. They won't know what's wrong. It just won't work. And it's so crucial to getting it right. And this film, I think, does a really good job of that. So it was really nice to see it on the big screen and hear the sound properly, and to see other people come and enjoying the film. It'll be really nice then when we go out on the road next week, going to Cork or Galway and Dublin, and see what people make of it again. But yeah, it's been really positive so far.
And then one last thing, what are you working on now?
So I've got a couple of things on the go. I have another film, an Irish language film with double band that I've written and that I'm directing, that we're looking at shooting later this year if we get all the ducks in a row. It's a horror film. So as far as I'm aware, that'll be the first ever Irish language horror film. As far as I know, I haven't heard of another one anyway. So looking forward to that. And yeah, I've got another few things in the pot, but as far as Irish language stuff goes, that's the one.
Fabulous. And Damien?
Yeah, my wife's a writer, so we're developing a film at the minute. A heist film, big fan of heist films, so we're writing a heist film at the minute, so hoping to get funding for that at some point later down the line.
Excellent. Okay, well, very, very exciting. I was hoping for the series of this. I was like, I would definitely watch the extended version. Maybe the lead character investigates crimes.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody, I think she could have her own show. If somebody
I would totally watch her. Like,
if somebody wanted to make that, I would absolutely write Leisha as a character with her own show.
Like
a few people have actually.
She's retired. She gets called back in and deal with all the politics. I would totally watch that.
Yeah, no. A few people said after the Belfast screening, they'd kind of come up and said, you know, what happened to her? What did she go on to do? And I was sort of looking over at Aislinn, going, well, go talk to Aislinn and see what happens, you know. But she's such a, and it's Bríd as well, you know. It's Bríd's own interpretation of it. It's just, you know, it seems to have gone down really, really well with people. The character and then Bríd's interpretation of it, you know.
Yeah, or a prequel. You know, what was she doing? What was she doing in the 80s? I would watch her all day. So, but thank you guys so much for chatting with us. That was excellent. Definitely one for the big screen as well.
Thank you so much. It was nice talking to you.